Hello everyone, and welcome back to Sun Moon Audiobook, the channel where we share wisdom and inspiring book journeys to help you grow and develop your best self, inside and out. There's a certain kind of silence just before dawn, when the world is still asleep, but the air feels like it's holding its breath for something new. It's in that fragile moment, when shadows are long, and the first threads of light start stitching the horizon, that you realize some things, truths, ideas, stories, have a way of staying with you. They don't just visit and leave. They take root, quietly, in the soil of your mind. They're not loud, not always urgent, but they stick. They shape the way you see, the way you feel, the way you act. And you can't always explain why they last, while others fade like dreams you can't recall after breakfast. This is where Chip and Dan Heath come in, two brothers who have spent their lives studying the anatomy of ideas, not in some sterile lab, but in the messy, beautiful terrain of human behavior. Their work is not about abstract theory or distant philosophy. It's about life, about why some messages inspire revolutions while others barely stir a ripple, about why certain stories stay etched in your memory years after you've heard them, while others dissolve into the blur of forgotten conversations. They speak with the clarity of teachers who've lived what they teach, blending research with tales that feel as real as the people you've known. The heart of their message is deceptively simple. If you want your ideas to matter, they have to stick. And that stickiness isn't luck, it's a craft made of shape and texture, of pattern and feeling, of knowing how to thread an idea so deeply into someone's mind that it becomes part of their inner landscape. Think about it. How many times have you heard advice, facts, or stories that made sense in the moment but vanished by the next day? And how rare is it to encounter an idea that clings, that travels with you like a refrain you can't stop humming? That's not magic. That's design. Chip and Dan reveal that the glue holding unforgettable ideas together is made of 6 essential elements, woven into something they call the success framework. Simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, emotional, stories. But they don't present it as a checklist to memorize. They bring it alive with moments, with people, with examples that feel like little windows into the human mind. They show how simplicity isn't about dumbing down, it's about finding the core so that nothing can distract from what matters most. They remind us that the unexpected catches us off guard, jolts us awake, and makes the mind lean in. They ground everything in the concrete because the human brain clings to images, textures, smells, not abstractions that float away. They teach that credibility isn't just about titles or statistics, it's about trust, and trust is built in many forms. They pull us into the realm of emotion, because without feeling there is no connection, no memory. And they wrap it all in stories, because stories are the oldest, most human way we've ever known to carry meaning. One of the most powerful truths here is that the world doesn't reward ideas just because they're good. Good ideas die in silence all the time. What gets remembered, what gets passed on, what changes someone's mind or heart, those are the ideas that manage to stick. You who are listening right now may have something inside you worth sharing, a truth, a vision, a seed of change. But if it doesn't land in a way that stays, it risks disappearing before it has a chance to grow. The Heath brothers give us not just the why, but the how. They show us the inner scaffolding of memory and meaning, and how to place your idea so it stands tall inside someone else's mind. It's not just for marketers or teachers or leaders, it's for anyone who has something to say and needs it to be heard. They talk about simplicity through the lens of a proverb, a compact, unforgettable truth like, "A bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush." You don't remember it because it's poetic, you remember it because it's the essence stripped of clutter. They remind us that people don't have room for every detail you want to cram in, so you choose the heart, the one thing that if they only remembered that, it would be enough. And then they give us the unexpected, like a twist in a story or a fact that flips your assumptions. This is the spark that makes you pause mid-step and think, wait, what? It's the mental hiccup that buys your idea another few seconds of attention, and that few seconds can be the difference between it vanishing or rooting itself. Then they lead us into the concrete. This is where vague dreams and fuzzy visions die if they can't be made real. Tell me it's sweet and my mind drifts. Tell me it's like honey dripping off a warm spoon, and I'm there with you. They press this point again and again. If you can touch it, see it, smell it, you can remember it. Without that, your idea becomes smoke. And credibility, so much more than the authority to speak. It can come from an expert, yes, but it can also come from details that feel so real they could only come from truth, from the voice of someone who's lived it, from the weight of a number that sticks in your head because it surprises you. Then there's emotion, the quiet but unstoppable current that pulls us toward caring. Without emotion, ideas may live in the mind for a moment, but they don't move the heart, and what doesn't move the heart rarely moves the hands. And finally, the story, not as decoration, but as the vessel that carries all the other elements together. A story doesn't just tell you what's true, it makes you feel it, taste it, believe it as if it were your own. I remember standing on a street corner years ago, watching an old man feed pigeons from a paper bag, and thinking about how the smallest gestures can outlive us if they land in someone's memory the right way. That's what these brothers are showing us, how to make our gestures, our words, our truths, survive in someone else's story. And so, we move deeper, into the pulse of this message, into the way each of these 6 threads can be woven so that your idea doesn't just brush past someone, but settles into them, like a warm ember that keeps glowing long after the moment has passed. Simplicity, they say, is where it begins. And it is where most of us stumble without even realizing. Because when you care deeply about something, you want to tell everything, the history, the nuances, the proof, the layers. You want to give it all, thinking more is better. But the paradox is that the more you load onto an idea, the heavier it becomes, and the harder it is for someone else to carry it with them. Stripping it down to its essence is an act of discipline, of love even, because you're not just making it easier to remember, you're making it impossible to forget. Imagine you're holding a diamond. You don't bury it under a pile of pebbles. You cut it until it catches the light from every angle. That's what they mean by finding the core. Once you have that, you guard it fiercely. You make every word serve it. You let it breathe, because space makes it shine brighter. Then there's the unexpected. This is where your idea breaks the pattern someone is trapped in. The brain craves patterns. It also tunes them out. It's like walking the same street every day. You stop noticing the cracks in the sidewalk or the color of the door on the corner. But add something unexpected, and the mind jolts awake. A purple car parked where there's never been one. A stranger offering you a flower in the middle of a workday. That's what your message needs to do, to gently shake someone out of their autopilot. And it's not just about surprise for surprise's sake, it's about creating curiosity, opening a gap between what someone knows and what they want to know. Curiosity is a magnetic force. When you create that gap, people lean in to close it, and your idea has more time to root itself. The Heaths remind us that suspense is one of the oldest human inventions. It's in every story that's lasted centuries. Not knowing what's next makes us stay. And that staying is what you need for stickiness. Concrete, though, is where all of this becomes touchable. You can't hold a concept in your hand, but you can hold an image, a smell, a sound. That's why when you think of your childhood, you remember the taste of certain meals, the feel of a worn blanket, the sound of a specific laugh. Concrete details act like mental hooks. They don't just help people understand your idea. They give them something to hang it on. Think of the difference between telling someone to be more generous and telling them to leave an extra coin for the next person's coffee. The first drifts away. The second sticks because it has shape, because you can picture it happening. The Heaths point out that experts often forget this step. They live in abstraction because they know the field so well, but to someone hearing it for the first time, the ground needs to be solid before they can walk on it. Then there's credibility, which is often misunderstood. We tend to think credibility is borrowed from titles, credentials, and authority, But it's more human than that. We trust people who speak with specificity, with details that make us feel, yes, they've been there. We trust numbers that surprise us enough to stay lodged in memory, like how fast a rumor can travel in a small town, or how many days a drop of water might take to circle the earth. And we trust people who show their vulnerability, because it makes their truth feel less like a performance and more like a confession. Credibility is earned in moments, and those moments often look smaller than we think. Emotion, perhaps, is the most obvious ingredient, but also the most misunderstood. To make someone care, you can't just tell them to care. You have to connect your idea to something they already value, something that already lives in them. People act on feelings, not facts. We move toward what we care about, and we care about what touches our hearts, even if we can't explain why. That's why a story about one person struggling can move us more than statistics about thousands. Emotion is the bridge between the mind and the heart. Without it, your idea might live in their head for a day, but it won't shape their choices, won't live in their actions. And stories are the oldest carriers of truth we've ever had. Long before we had books, we had firesides and voices passing down what mattered most. A story wraps information in meaning. It lets someone see themselves in the lesson without you pointing a finger. It takes the 6 elements and binds them into one whole, so that they move together, strengthening each other. When you tell a story, you're not just transmitting an idea, you're inviting someone into an experience. They don't just hear it, they live it for a moment. And what we live, we remember. There's a moment halfway through this journey where the Heaths invite us to pause, not with their words, but with the stories they choose to tell. They share tales of teachers who turned a forgettable fact into something unforgettable with a small twist. Of public health workers who saved lives not by giving more data, but by framing the message in a way that caught attention and stayed there. Of leaders who shaped entire movements by crafting a vision so clear, so vivid, that people could almost taste it. This pause is where you realize these aren't just techniques for communication. They're acts of generosity. Making your idea stick is a way of making it last beyond you, of ensuring it reaches the ones who need it. You, listening right now, might be thinking of an idea you've tried to share before. Maybe it was a dream, a truth, a warning, a piece of advice. Maybe it slipped away from the person you gave it to, and you felt the ache of watching it fade. This is where hope enters again, because what didn't stick before can still be reshaped, refined, told again in a way that it can take root. That's the gift of understanding this craft. It's not about shouting louder, it's about speaking in a way that stays. And so, we step into the quiet art of turning theory into lived reality, because knowing the elements is one thing, but weaving them into your own voice is where the real transformation happens. The Heath brothers never just hand you the framework and leave. They walk beside you through examples that pull these principles out of the abstract and into the streetlights and sidewalks of everyday life. They tell the story of a man named Jared, whose drastic weight loss became the heart of a fast food chain's ad campaign. It wasn't a statistic about calories that spread. It was one person's journey, told simply, concretely, with an unexpected twist that fast food could be part of a health transformation. It was credible because it was real, emotional because it was human, and wrapped in a story that others could picture themselves stepping into. And it stuck. This is what they want us to see, that the stickiest ideas are often the ones dressed in the clothes of a single, relatable example. Not the whole world, just one life. They speak of urban legends, those strange tales that hop from mouth to mouth until you'd think they were etched in some invisible book of human folklore. The legend of the man waking in a hotel room missing a kidney isn't just a wild story. It survives because it is specific, unexpected, full of concrete imagery that makes your mind conjure every detail as if you were there. It's the kind of story that spreads because it was designed, perhaps unconsciously, with the elements of success, proving that the craft of making something stick has been with us long before it had a name. There's a humility in their message, too, because they don't suggest that every idea you share will spark a movement. What they suggest is something quieter, but just as powerful, that you can give your idea the best chance it has to live on. That whether you're a parent teaching a child, a leader guiding a team, a friend offering comfort, or an activist trying to shift the tide, these tools can make the difference between being heard in passing and being remembered when it matters. They remind us that simplicity is not the enemy of depth. A simple core is like a sturdy spine. You can attach as many limbs and details as you like, but without it, the body collapses. They challenge us to ask, what's the one thing you want someone to remember if they forget everything else? And then, to shape the unexpected, they urge us to think like magicians, not to deceive, but to lead attention where it matters most, to create those moments when someone's assumptions crack just enough for new light to get in. Because it's in those cracks that change begins. When they speak of concreteness, they urge us to anchor our ideas in the senses, to resist the temptation of floating in vague inspiration, and instead invite people to step into a scene they can feel under their feet. If you want someone to understand perseverance, don't just say, "Never give up." Show them the runner who finished the race with one shoe in her hand, limping, bleeding, smiling. That's an image the mind refuses to let go of. And in credibility, they open the door to creative ways of building trust, not just citing experts, but creating testable claims, letting people see for themselves, giving them small truths that prove the bigger truth. Emotion, they remind us, is the ignition. Without it, even the most perfectly crafted message will sit cold in the air. And emotion doesn't always mean making someone cry, it means making them care. Sometimes that's through joy, sometimes fear, sometimes awe, sometimes a sense of belonging. The point is to connect your idea to something that already lives inside them. And when you bring it all together in a story, the message stops being yours alone, it becomes theirs. It becomes something they can pass on, not as a lecture, but as a lived moment worth retelling. There's a place in the middle of the book where the Heaths seem to lean in and almost whisper, "You can do this. You don't have to be a natural storyteller. You don't have to be a marketer. You don't have to be born with some rare gift. You just have to care enough to shape your message so it survives in the wild. Because the world is full of noise, and if what you have to say matters, it deserves to be heard above the static." And here's where I remember a small, almost invisible moment. I was sitting in a cafe, the rain painting slow rivers down the window, when a woman at the table next to me leaned forward to tell her friend something. Her voice dropped, not for secrecy, but for intimacy, and whatever she said made her friend's eyes fill in an instant. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the way they landed. It wasn't the volume or the flourish, it was the way the words seemed to carry a whole shared world between them. That, I thought, is what it means for something to stick. Not to be loud, but to be unforgettable. And so the Heaths bring us toward the practical, toward the quiet but potent invitation to try. To take these 6 threads and weave them into your next conversation, your next piece of writing, your next chance to teach or persuade or inspire. They remind you that you won't get it perfect every time, but every time you try, you're giving your message a better shot at life. And that's the work, loving your idea enough to help it survive. As the journey deepens, the Heath brothers turn their gaze toward the kinds of examples that make these principles feel less like advice and more like lived proof. They talk about the fight against littering in Texas, a campaign that could have easily drowned in forgettable slogans about keeping streets clean. Instead, it became the now iconic "Don't Mess with Texas" movement. On the surface, it was just 4 words, but beneath it was a masterclass in stickiness. It was simple, no frills, no extra baggage. It was unexpected trash talk repurposed as a badge of pride. It was concrete. You could picture someone tossing a can out of a truck window and someone else shutting it down. It was credible because it resonated with a deeply ingrained state identity. It carried emotion, pride wrapped in defiance. And it came alive through stories, commercials showing real Texans standing up for their land. In those 4 words, the campaign wove every strand of success into something that still lingers decades later. That's the kind of impact they want you to see is possible. They also share the famous case of the kidney theft urban legend, not to encourage fear, but to show how a story, even when false, can survive and spread when it has the right anatomy. The setup catches you off guard, strangers' kindness turning into danger. The details are concrete: the ice-filled bathtub, the phone call, the missing organ. The emotional pull is visceral fear for your safety. And even without verified credibility, the specificity makes it feel real enough to pass along. These legends, though untrue, reveal something powerful about human nature. We carry forward what we can see, feel, and retell with ease. There's something humbling in realizing that the same mechanics that make dangerous myths spread can also be harnessed for good. It means that you, right now, have the ability to craft a message with the same enduring power, but aimed toward truth, hope, and change. The Heaths point out that some of the world's most powerful movements were built not on endless facts, but on a handful of sticky, repeatable ideas that anyone could share. Think of Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream. It wasn't a spreadsheet of policy details that moved millions. It was a vision painted in words so vivid they felt like something you could step into. That's concreteness and emotion working together, wrapped in a story so compelling that it became part of the cultural fabric. But they don't leave it there, in the realm of big movements and sweeping histories. They bring it back to the everyday, to the teacher trying to get a room of restless students to remember a lesson, to the nurse explaining a treatment plan to a worried patient, to the small business owner telling their story to a handful of strangers. In every one of these situations, the stakes are real. The success of the moment depends on whether the message lands and stays. And that's why this craft matters so deeply. Because every one of us, in our own corner of the world, carries ideas worth keeping alive. There's also a moment where they address a hidden fear, the worry that being simple or emotionally resonant might somehow feel manipulative. But they're clear. There's a difference between manipulation and connection. Manipulation hides the truth to serve the messenger. Connection reveals the truth in a way that serves the listener. And the litmus test is this: if your message is meant to help, to illuminate, to genuinely add value, then making it stick isn't a trick. It's an act of service. You can feel, reading their words, that they believe in the dignity of this work. They don't romanticize it. It's not about being endlessly clever or always surprising people with gimmicks. It's about respect. Respect for your idea, for the people you're speaking to, and for the space between you where something lasting can grow. And they keep returning to this truth. Good ideas are not enough. The world is full of brilliant thoughts that went unheard because they never caught hold. It's the sticky ones that travel, that inspire action, that endure. And that endurance is something you can shape. As you imagine carrying this forward, think of your own life. The phrases you still remember from childhood, the small lessons that outlasted the years, the stories you find yourself telling again without even realizing. They stayed with you because they had the right shape, the right feel. They were simple enough to carry, surprising enough to notice, tangible enough to hold in your mind, credible enough to trust, emotional enough to matter, and told in a way that begged to be shared. That's the blueprint you've been handed here, and it's one that can be applied in moments both grand and small. And somewhere in this, the Heaths leave space for reflection. They invite you not just to learn, but to notice, to watch the ideas you encounter in the next week and ask yourself why some linger and others vanish, to feel in real time the pull of a message that sticks. Because once you start noticing, you begin to understand in your bones what they've been showing you all along. That stickiness is not an accident, but a choice you can make over and over until your words are no longer just heard, but held. And here, as the book draws us further in, the Heath brothers begin to plant seeds in our imagination about how these principles can be quietly embedded into the fabric of our everyday interactions, not as some grand performance, but as a natural extension of how we show up in the world. They tell the story of a science teacher explaining the concept of scale to her students. She could have thrown numbers at them: light years, kilometers, astronomical units, but she didn't. Instead, she rolled out a strip of paper across the room, each inch representing millions of miles, and placed tiny stickers to mark planets along it. The students could walk the length of the paper, see the vast emptiness between worlds, feel the reality of space in their own steps. That's concreteness in action, an abstract idea turned into something you can literally walk across. And because they experienced it, the lesson didn't just land, it stayed. The Heaths keep reminding us that emotion is not just about sadness or joy. It's about caring enough to act. They speak of a charity campaign that shifted its focus from presenting overwhelming statistics about hunger to telling the story of one child with a name, a face, and a single photograph. Donations doubled. Why? Because while our minds can grow numb in the face of numbers, our hearts are moved by the depth of one tangible life. That's the paradox they want us to embrace. Sometimes less information means more impact, not because you're hiding truth, but because you're delivering it in a way the heart can actually hold. They also explore the way credibility can be woven into a message through small, undeniable details. They recall how a journalist describing a war zone didn't just write the streets were destroyed. He wrote about a bicycle lying in the middle of the road, with its front wheel bent in half, still spinning. That image proved more convincing than any official report. Details like that are anchors in the mind, small fragments that carry the weight of truth. And once the mind accepts them, it opens more willingly to the larger story. The unexpected, too, can be as subtle as a pause, a moment of stillness before the punch of an idea. They give examples of public speakers who hold the room not by racing through words, but by allowing silence to stretch, making the audience lean forward, anticipating. Surprise is not always shock. It can be the gentle break in rhythm that makes people suddenly aware they're listening. As they move toward the practical, they show how businesses, teachers, leaders, and everyday people can embed these 6 principles into anything from an elevator pitch to a heartfelt letter. They talk about the airline safety announcement that broke the mold, not by changing the information, which is regulated and routine, but by delivering it with humor and vivid imagery. Passengers who usually tuned out instead remembered every instruction. That's the unexpected meeting the concrete, wrapped in emotion and story. And it's here that they address a quiet truth many of us hesitate to admit. Most of the ideas we try to share vanish into the air, not because they were unworthy, but because we didn't shape them in a way that allowed them to live. The world is not obligated to remember what we say. If we want to be remembered, we must meet people where their minds and hearts are most open. And that openness comes when an idea feels like a gift rather than a demand. You, listening right now, might feel the flicker of a message inside you, a lesson you've learned the hard way, a truth you've carried quietly, a story you've always meant to tell. The Heaths are urging you to bring it out, to strip it to its essence, to find the texture that makes it tangible, the spark that makes it surprising, the detail that makes it credible, the thread of emotion that makes it matter, and the story that makes it live. They're urging you not to wait for the perfect moment, because the perfect moment is a myth. The right time is the moment you care enough to shape it. And maybe the most powerful part of their message is this: when you give your idea this kind of care, you're not just making it stick for your sake. You're giving someone else the chance to carry it forward, to tell it in their own voice, to let it ripple outward in ways you'll never fully see. The sticky idea becomes bigger than the person who first spoke it. It becomes part of a shared language, a shared memory, a shared possibility. In the final movement of their work, the Heath brothers invite us to think of ourselves not just as speakers or writers, but as planters of seeds. Some will take root quickly, some will lie dormant for years, and some may never sprout in ways we can witness. But if we've shaped them with simplicity, with the unexpected, with concrete detail, with credibility, with emotion, and with story, they have a chance, a real chance, to grow in the hearts and minds of others, long after our voices have gone quiet. So maybe your task, after all this, is not to remember every acronym or example, but to remember the feeling of an idea that stayed with you, and to honor that by crafting your own with the same intention. Speak it as though you are handing someone a small, precious flame. Protect it as you pass it on. And watch, even from afar, as it catches and burns in places you could never have reached alone. Because in the end, the sticky idea isn't just about memory, it's about movement. It's about shaping the kind of thought that doesn't just sit still in someone's mind, but walks with them, changes them, and maybe even shapes the way they change the world. And that, more than anything, is the quiet magic you've been given here. If this message has stirred something in you, if it's made you think of an idea you want to give wings, then let's keep this conversation alive. Like, share, comment, and subscribe, not just to support these words, but to put your own into the world. Tell me what stuck with you, what you felt, what stories of your own you want to see take flight. Because every time you share, you're not just responding, you're becoming part of the ripple. And that ripple, once it begins, is unstoppable.